There are moments in life when we feel lost, when the path ahead is unclear, and when obstacles seem too great to overcome. We may feel surrounded by problems, unsure of which way to turn, but I am here today to remind you of one eternal truth. God will make a way for you. Throughout history, God has been making a way where there was none. When the Israelites stood before the Red Sea with Pharaoh's army behind them and no escape in sight, God parted the waters. When Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, God shut the mouths of the lions. When the three Hebrew boys, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, were cast into the fiery furnace, God walked with them in the fire and brought them out unharmed. Even when we don't see a way, God is working behind the scenes. Life often presents us with challenges that seem impossible to overcome. Mountains too high to climb, rivers too wide to cross, and walls too thick to break down. In these moments, doubt and fear can creep in, making us question whether God is truly with us. But the truth is, God is always working, even when we cannot see it. His ways are higher than ours, and His plans far exceed anything we could imagine. The Bible reminds us in Isaiah 55, verse 8 to 9, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." This verse is a powerful reminder that God operates on a level far beyond human understanding. While we may be focused on the problem before us, God sees the bigger picture. He knows what is best for us, and He is orchestrating events in ways we cannot yet comprehend. Think about the story of Joseph in the Bible. He was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. From a human perspective, it seemed as though everything was against him. But even in those dark times, God was working behind the scenes. What looked like a series of unfortunate events was actually part of a greater plan. In the end, Joseph rose to a position of great authority in Egypt and was able to save his family from famine. Looking back, he understood that what others meant for evil, God used for good, Genesis 50:20. Similarly, in our lives, we may face betrayals, disappointments, and hardships that don't make sense. We may pray for an open door only to find it shut. We may ask God for a breakthrough only to experience another delay. But just because we don't see progress doesn't mean God isn't working. Just like a seed planted in the ground, growth happens beneath the surface before we ever see the first sprout. Many times we expect God to work in a certain way, but He often chooses a different path. The Israelites, for example, never expected that God would part the Red Sea to make a way of escape for them. They were trapped between the sea and Pharaoh's army, and they thought they were doomed. But in that very moment, God was already working on their deliverance. He didn't just provide a way, He created one where none existed before. This is the power of our God. He doesn't need a visible road to lead us to victory. He can make one in the midst of impossibility. Trusting in God's higher ways means surrendering our own limited understanding. It means believing that even when things don't go according to our plans, God is still in control. It requires faith to wait on His timing, patience to endure trials, and courage to keep moving forward even when we don't see immediate results. One of the best things we can do in difficult seasons is to remind ourselves of God's past faithfulness. Think back to times when He has come through for you before. If He has provided, healed, and guided you in the past, He will surely do it again. His character does not change. He is the same yesterday, today, and forever. Hebrews 13:13. So today, if you are facing a situation that seems impossible, take heart. God is working behind the scenes. He is moving pieces into place, aligning circumstances, and preparing the right people and opportunities to bring His plan to fulfillment. Though you may not see the way right now, trust that He has already made one. Keep your faith strong, hold on to His promises, and in due time, you will see the masterpiece He has been creating all along. When man says it's impossible, God proves otherwise. He opens doors that no one can shut, and He makes a way even when everything around us suggests otherwise. Often we come across situations in life where every option seems exhausted, every effort appears futile, and every road seems blocked. In these moments, we may feel like giving up, but this is precisely when we must remember that God is in control. His power is unlimited, and when he decides to move, nothing and no one can stand in his way. The Bible assures us in Revelation 3:8, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. This means that when God ordains something for your life, no force on earth can prevent it from coming to pass. No rejection, no delay, no obstacle can alter what God has set in motion. When we rely on our strength and resources, we may hit dead ends, but when we trust in God, He creates new pathways. He can open doors of opportunity, provide unexpected solutions, and make the impossible possible. A great example of this is found in the story of Paul and Silas in Acts 16. They were imprisoned for preaching the gospel, locked in chains, and confined in a dungeon with no escape. But instead of surrendering to despair, they began to pray and worship God. In response to their faith, God caused an earthquake to shake the prison, opening the doors and breaking their chains. What man had locked, God had unlocked. This is a powerful reminder that when we worship instead of worry, God moves in miraculous ways. Sometimes the doors that remain closed in our lives are just as important as the ones that open. We may feel frustrated when a job opportunity doesn't work out, when a relationship ends, or when a dream seems unattainable. But God sees the full picture. He knows which doors to shut because He has something better in store. It's in these moments that we must trust His wisdom and timing. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater. Trusting God requires faith, even when circumstances seem hopeless. So, faith is believing in God's promises even when there is no evidence of change. It is the confidence that He is working even when we cannot see it. The Bible tells us in Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. This means that as believers, we are called to trust in God's plans, not just in what we see or understand. A perfect example of this is Abraham. God promised him that he would be the father of many nations, yet he and his wife Sarah were well beyond childbearing age. From a human perspective, the promise seemed impossible. But Abraham chose to believe God, and in due time Sarah gave birth to Isaac. God fulfilled His word, proving that He is always faithful. Many times, life will present us with trials that test our faith. Perhaps you are facing a financial crisis, a health challenge, or a season of waiting where nothing seems to be moving forward. In these moments, it's easy to focus on the problems rather than the promises. But faith is choosing to believe that God is in control, even when everything around us says otherwise. Faith requires action. It's not just about believing, it's about stepping forward even when we don't know the outcome. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, he asked if he could come to him. Jesus said, "Come," and Peter stepped out of the boat. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he was able to walk on water. But the moment he focused on the storm, he began to sink. This teaches us a valuable lesson. When we fix our eyes on God instead of our fears, we can do the impossible. So whatever you are facing today, remember that God is in control. He can open doors that no one can shut. And He calls us to trust Him even when we can't see the way ahead. Choose faith over fear, trust over doubt, and believe that God is working everything together for your good. His timing is perfect, and in due season, He will make a way for you. Trusting God requires faith, even when circumstances seem hopeless. It is easy to have faith when everything is going well, when the bills are paid, health is strong, and relationships are thriving. But real faith is tested in times of uncertainty, when the road ahead is unclear and when prayers seem unanswered. This is when we must choose to trust in God's promises rather than our circumstances. The Bible reminds us in 2 Corinthians 5:7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. Faith is not about what we see, it is about believing in what God has spoken, even when there is no visible evidence of it yet. Consider the story of the Israelites standing before the Red Sea. Behind them, Pharaoh's army was in pursuit, and before them, a vast body of water blocked their escape. By human logic, they were trapped. But God had already prepared a way. In that moment, fear could have overtaken them. But Moses trusted in God's command, and with a mighty act, God parted the sea, making a way where there was none. This is the essence of faith, trusting that God has already made a path even when we cannot see it. The reality is that faith is not the absence of fear, but the decision to trust God despite. When Peter walked on water, he succeeded as long as his eyes were on Jesus. The moment he focused on the storm, he began to sink. This teaches us that faith is about perspective. When we focus on our problems, they seem overwhelming. But when we focus on God, we are reminded that nothing is too hard for Him. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater. We often experience disappointments, doors that close, opportunities that don't work out, dreams that seem delayed. In those moments, it's easy to feel discouraged, thinking that things are falling apart. But the truth is, God is always working behind the scenes, aligning things according to His divine plan. What may feel like rejection is often God's redirection to something better. A great example of this is Joseph's story. He had dreams of greatness, but instead of seeing them fulfilled immediately, he was betrayed by his own brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and thrown into prison. For years, it seemed as if everything in his life was going wrong. But through every hardship, God was preparing him for something greater. In time, Joseph was elevated to a position of power in Egypt, and he was able to save countless lives, including the very brothers who betrayed him. When Joseph finally saw the full picture, he declared in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." The same principle applies to our lives. We may not understand why certain things happen, but God sees the bigger picture. A job loss may lead to a better opportunity. A closed door in one area may open a greater one elsewhere. A painful season may prepare us for a purpose we could never have imagined. God's timing is perfect even when we don't understand it. One of the hardest things to do is to wait on God. We live in a world of instant results where patience is often difficult. But God does not operate on human schedules. His timing is always right, even when it feels delayed. Ecclesiastes 3:11 reminds us, He has made everything beautiful in its time. Think about Sarah and Abraham. God promised them a child, but years passed with no fulfillment of that promise. They grew impatient, and Sarah even tried to take matters into her own hands, leading to complications. But when the time was right, according to God's perfect plan, Isaac was born. The delay was not denial, it was preparation. We must learn to trust that when things are not happening as fast as we want, it does not mean God has forgotten us. It simply means He is working on something greater than we can imagine. Waiting is not wasted time, it is preparation time. So whatever you are facing today, remember this: have faith even when you don't see the way. Trust that your setbacks are setups for something greater. And believe that God's timing is always perfect. In the end, you will see that He has been working all along, making a way just for you. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater. In life, we often encounter obstacles that seem like roadblocks: losses, failures, disappointments, and unexpected detours. In those moments, it is easy to feel discouraged and wonder why things are not going the way we plan. However, what we see as a setback is often God setting us up for something far greater than we could have imagined. One of the best examples of this is Joseph's journey in the Bible. He had a dream that he would one day be in a position of leadership, but instead of rising to greatness immediately, he was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, falsely accused, and imprisoned. Everything seemed to be going wrong. But in reality, God was positioning Joseph exactly where he needed to be. Each trial prepared him for the moment when he would rise to power in Egypt and save countless lives, including his own family. Joseph later told his brothers in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives." This teaches us a powerful lesson. Just because we do not understand what is happening does not mean God is not at work. Sometimes the most painful moments of our lives are the very things that God uses to shape us, strengthen us, and prepare us for a greater purpose. The closed doors, the delays, and the disappointments are not the end of the story. They are just part of God's greater plan. God's timing is perfect even when we do not understand it. One of the greatest challenges we face is waiting on God. In a world that values speed and instant gratification, it is hard to remain patient when things are not happening as quickly as we would like. However, the Bible reminds us in Ecclesiastes 3:11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This means that even when we do not see immediate results, God is still working behind the scenes. Think about Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, but years passed without any sign of fulfillment. They grew impatient and tried to take matters into their own hands, which led to complications. But when the time was right, Sarah gave birth to Isaac. The delay was not a denial. It was preparation for God's perfect plan. Many times we pray for something, and when the answer does not come right away, we assume that God is not listening. But the truth is, God's delays are not His denials. Sometimes He withholds something because we are not yet ready for it. Other times, He is aligning circumstances to make the blessing even greater when it arrives. Faith requires action. It is not just about believing, it is about stepping forward even when we do not know the outcome. When Peter saw Jesus walking on water, he asked if he could come to him. Jesus said, "Come." And Peter stepped out of the boat. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on water. But the moment he focused on the storm, he began to sink. This teaches us a valuable lesson. When we fix our eyes on God instead of our fears, we can do the impossible. God opens doors that no one can shut. We face obstacles that seem insurmountable. We apply for jobs and get rejected. We pray for healing but do not see immediate results. We dream of something greater but feel stuck. In these moments, we must remember that God is the one who opens doors. Revelation 3:8 says, "I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut." This means that when God has something for you, no person, no circumstance, and no setback can take it away. We must learn to trust Him even when we do not understand His ways. What may seem like a setback is actually a setup for a greater purpose. His timing is always perfect, and when we take steps of faith, we will see Him open doors we never imagined possible. Even when it seems impossible, God will make a way. God's timing is perfect, even when we do not understand it. One of the hardest things we face as believers is waiting on God. In a world that thrives on instant results and quick solutions, waiting can feel frustrating and even discouraging. However, the Bible reminds us in Ecclesiastes 3:11, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This means that God's timing is not just good, it is perfect. Even when we do not see immediate answers, He is working behind the scenes, aligning circumstances in ways we cannot comprehend. A great example of this is found in the life of Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, yet years passed with no sign of fulfillment. As time went on, doubt crept in, and they took matters into their own hands, leading to unnecessary complications. However, God had not forgotten His promise. When the time was right, Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac. The delay was not a denial, it was preparation for God's perfect plan. This teaches us that even when we feel like nothing is happening, God is still at work, setting things in place for His perfect will to unfold. Faith requires action. It is not enough to simply believe that God will make a way. We must also step out in faith. Throughout the Bible, we see that miracles often happen when people take action, even in uncertainty. One powerful example is Peter walking on water. When he saw Jesus on the sea, he asked to come to him. Jesus told him, "Come," and Peter stepped out of the boat. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on water. But the moment he focused on the storm around him, he began to sink. This shows us an important truth. Faith is not about waiting for perfect conditions, but about trusting God enough to move forward despite the storm. There are many times in life when we hesitate because we do not see the whole picture. We want all the details before we take the next step, but faith does not work that way. Faith is stepping out even when we do not know the outcome, believing that God will guide our steps. Just as Peter experienced, we may face storms along the way, but if we keep our eyes on God rather than our circumstances, we will see His power at work in our lives. God opens doors that no one can shut. There are moments when we face obstacles that seem impossible to overcome, doors that remain closed despite our best efforts. However, Revelation 3:8 reminds us, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. This means that when God has a plan for your life, no force on earth can stop it. People may try to block you, situations may seem unfavorable, and delays may occur, but when God declares something over your life, it will happen in His perfect time. Think about Paul and Silas in prison. They were locked away, their feet bound in chains, with no human way of escape. Yet, instead of losing hope, they chose to worship. As they prayed and sang hymns, an earthquake shook the prison, breaking their chains and opening the doors. This was not a coincidence. It was God proving that He alone has the power to open doors, no matter how impossible the situation may seem. We must remember that God's ways are not our ways. Sometimes He closes doors to protect us from something that is not meant for us. Other times He delays an opportunity because He is preparing something even better. Our job is to trust Him, even when we do not understand the process. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater. If we remain faithful, patient, and willing to take steps of faith, we will see that God always makes a way, even when there seems to be none. God's timing is perfect, even when we do not understand it. Life often puts us in situations where we feel like nothing is happening and our prayers are going unanswered. In these moments, it is easy to feel forgotten or assume that God is not listening. However, Ecclesiastes 3:11 reminds us, He has made everything beautiful in its time. This means that God's timing is not just good, it is perfect. Even when it seems like things are delayed, God is working behind the scenes, setting everything in place for the right moment. A great example of this is Abraham and Sarah. God promised them a son, yet years passed with no sign of fulfillment. They grew impatient and tried to take matters into their own hands, which led to unnecessary complications. But God had not forgotten His promise. When the time was right, Sarah conceived and gave birth to Isaac. The delay was not a denial, it was preparation. This teaches us that when we do not see immediate results, it does not mean God is inactive. He is working in ways we cannot yet see, preparing something greater than we imagine. Faith requires action. It is not enough to believe that God will make a way. We must also take steps of faith. Many times, God calls us to move forward even when we do not have all the answers. A powerful example of this is Peter walking on water. When he saw Jesus on the sea, he asked if he could come to him. Jesus said, "Come." And Peter stepped out of the boat. As long as he kept his eyes on Jesus, he walked on water. But the moment he focused on the storm, he began to sink. This teaches us that faith is not about waiting for perfect conditions, but about trusting God enough to step out even when the way ahead is unclear. Often we hesitate because we want all the details before we move. But faith does not work that way. Faith means stepping out even when we do not see the whole picture, believing that God will guide our steps. Just like Peter, we may face storms along the way, but if we keep our focus on God rather than our fears, we will experience His power working through us. God opens doors that no one can shut. There are times in life when every path seems blocked, and no matter how hard we try, things do not move forward. But Revelation 3:8 says, I have placed before you an open door that no one can shut. This means that when God has something for you, no obstacle, no delay, and no opposition can stop it. A great example is Paul and Silas. They were imprisoned, locked in chains, and their situation seemed hopeless. But instead of giving in to fear, they began to worship God. In response to their faith, an earthquake shook the prison, breaking their chains and opening the doors. This was a powerful demonstration that when God decides to move, nothing can stop Him. What looks like a setback is often a setup for something greater. We all experience moments of disappointment, failed plans, closed doors, and unexpected challenges. It is easy to assume that things are falling apart, but in reality, God is often redirecting us to something better. Joseph's life is a perfect example. He had dreams of greatness, but instead of seeing them fulfilled immediately, he was betrayed by his brothers, sold into slavery, and imprisoned. It seemed like everything was going wrong. But each challenge prepared him for the moment when he would become a leader in Egypt, saving many lives. Later, he told his brothers in Genesis 50:20, "You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good." God provides even when resources seem limited. Sometimes we face situations where we do not have enough, whether it is finances, strength, or opportunity. But God is our provider. In the story of Elijah and the widow, she only had a little flour and oil left, yet God multiplied what she had, ensuring she never ran out. This reminds us that God can take what little we have and make it more than enough. No matter what you are facing, trust that God will make a way. His timing is perfect. Faith requires action, and He opens doors that no one can shut. Even when it seems impossible, He is working, and He will provide in ways you never expected.